coffee shop was too bright. Everything about it screamed expensive. White marble counters, industrial ceiling fans. The kind of place where a single latte cost more than most people's lunch. Kai had been waiting for 15 minutes, refreshing his phone every 30 seconds, checking the time like it would somehow make his interviewer arrive faster. He'd applied for this job 3 months ago. Executive assistant to Ethan Cross, CEO of Cross Enterprises. One of those positions that everyone told him was impossible. You need 5 years of experience, they said. You need connections. Kai had neither. He had a degree in business administration and a desperate need to pay rent. When Ethan finally walked in, Kai almost didn't recognize him. The photos online didn't capture how young he looked. Maybe 35, maybe younger. Expensive suit, the kind that probably cost more than Kai's entire wardrobe. Dark hair, sharp features, the type of face that made people stare. But it was his eyes that caught Kai's attention. Cold, calculating. Like he was already assessing whether Kai was worth his time. "You're late," Ethan said, not bothering with a greeting. He sat across from Kai, not bothering to remove his jacket or show any sign of wanting to be here. "I arrived early," Kai replied carefully. He'd learned in his last job interview that being defensive got you nowhere. 15 minutes before our scheduled time, and yet you're still late. Ethan opened his phone, not even looking at Kai. "I've been in meetings all morning. You're the 6th person I'm interviewing for this position. The previous 5 didn't work out." Kai's stomach dropped. If 5 people had already failed, what chance did he have? He swallowed hard. Why not? Ethan finally looked at him. Really looked at him. "Because I don't have time for mediocrity. I work 60-hour weeks minimum. I expect my assistant to work 70. I'm exacting. Some would say impossible." The last person cried during their probation period. There it was. The threat. The warning that this job would destroy him if he wasn't strong enough. And the strange part was that Kai felt something click inside his chest, something that looked like excitement. "I've never been good at accepting limits," Kai heard himself say. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Most people would run away from that description. "Most people aren't desperate enough," Kai said, and then immediately regretted it. That was honest. That was vulnerable. In job interviews, you were supposed to pretend you had options. But Ethan smiled. Not a warm smile, a knowing one. "At least you're honest. That's something." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. Not because it's a test. Because I want to know if you're actually the kind of person who thinks before you acts. How would you describe your relationship with power?" It was such a strange question. Kai's mind spun through possible answers, all the corporate speak bullshit he'd prepared. But something about Ethan's expression stopped him from lying. "I'm intimidated by it," Kai said quietly, "but I'm also fascinated by it. I think I'm the kind of person who could get lost working for someone powerful. The kind who might forget that I have boundaries." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. "That's exactly the kind of person I need. Someone who understands that working for me means being completely absorbed in the work, completely invested. Are you capable of that?" Kai thought about his empty apartment, his maxed-out credit cards, his family back home, wondering when he was going to get a real job. He thought about the fact that this man was offering him something that terrified him. "Yes," he said, "I think I am." Ethan stood up. The interview was apparently over. "You start Monday, 8 a.m. sharp. Bring no personal items, no photographs, no distractions. You'll be working in my office, and I don't tolerate anything that breaks focus. Your salary is $70,000 a year. It's more than you're worth right now, but you'll earn it or you'll be gone. Understood?" Kai was so stunned that he just nodded. He'd gotten the job. He'd actually gotten the job. One more thing, Ethan said as he was leaving. He turned back, and there was something in his expression that Kai couldn't quite read. This job is going to change you. Whether that's good or bad depends entirely on whether you can handle the pressure. Some people thrive under it. Some people break. Find out which one you are. And then he was gone, leaving Kai sitting alone in the expensive coffee shop, heart-pounding, already wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. The Monday morning that followed was a blur. Kai arrived at the Cross Enterprises building at 7:30 a.m., 15 minutes early like he'd promised himself. The office was on the 42nd floor, all glass and steel, and the kind of view that made you feel small. Ethan's office was exactly what Kai had expected. Massive desk made of dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Everything organized with almost obsessive precision. No personal touches. No photographs. No indication that a human being worked here rather than a machine. "You're early," Ethan said. Kai couldn't tell if that was good or bad. "You said 8 a.m. sharp," Kai replied. "I wanted to make sure I was settled before then." "Settled?" Ethan looked at him like he'd said something amusing. "Your job is to settle me, to make my day run smoothly, to anticipate my needs before I have to ask. You don't get to settle, you get to work." And that's when Kai's life became the contract. It wasn't an official contract. There was nothing written down, except the employment agreement he'd signed. But from that first day, it became clear that there were unspoken terms. Ethan demanded everything. Early mornings that turned into late nights. Weekends that disappeared. Kai's personal life, what little he had, became secondary to Ethan's schedule. But the strange thing was that Kai didn't mind. By the end of the first week, Kai had reorganized Ethan's entire filing system. He'd anticipated the order of Ethan's morning. Coffee at 6:45 a.m., emails reviewed by 7:00, conference calls starting at 7:15. He'd learned that Ethan took his coffee with 1 sugar and a splash of cream, not the oat milk latte he'd ordered on day 1. By the end of the first month, Kai knew Ethan's schedule better than Ethan did. He knew which meetings Ethan hated. The board meetings. Always the board meetings. He knew that Ethan worked best in silence, but occasionally needed human interaction, which Kai had learned to provide without being asked. And somewhere between month 1 and month 2, something shifted. Something neither of them acknowledged, but both of them felt. It started small. Ethan's hand brushing against Kai's when they both reached for the same file. Ethan asking Kai's opinion about a business decision, actually listening to the answer. Ethan ordering lunch for 2 instead of 1, setting it up at Kai's desk, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You should eat," Ethan said one afternoon, appearing at Kai's desk with a sandwich and a bottle of water. "You've been here since 6 it's 4 in the afternoon. Your blood sugar is probably non-existent." Kai looked at the sandwich, then at Ethan. "How did you know I hadn't eaten?" "Because I know you," Ethan said simply, and then walked away like he hadn't just said something that made Kai's entire world tilt. Because the terrifying, thrilling truth was that Ethan didn't know him. Ethan knew that Kai got headaches when he was stressed. Ethan knew that Kai ran miles at a time, to process emotions. Ethan knew that Kai had called his mom on Sunday, even though he claimed to not be close with his family. And Kai knew things about Ethan too. Kai knew that the coldness wasn't cruelty. It was protection. Kai knew that Ethan had built this empire from nothing, and that the cost had been everything. Kai knew that beneath the power and control was someone who was desperately, dangerously lonely. The moment it finally happened, Kai wasn't even sure it was real at first. It was 11 p.m. on a Thursday. Ethan was working on a merger proposal that was due the next morning. Kai was at his desk, which had somehow become part of Ethan's office, organizing documents and preparing materials for the morning's presentation. "Come here," Ethan said. Without looking up from his desk, Kai went. Of course he went. He'd been going when Ethan asked for months now. When Kai reached Ethan's desk, Ethan finally looked up. "I need you to understand something," he said quietly. "This job, this position, the contract that I'm paying you to fulfill, it's going to consume you. It's already consuming you. And I need you to understand that I'm aware of that, and I'm okay with it. The question is, are you?" Kai's mouth was dry. "Are you asking if I want to be consumed by you? I'm asking if you're prepared for the fact that I've stopped seeing you as an employee," Ethan said. "And I'm asking if you're prepared for what that means." Kai thought about every boundary he'd crossed, every late night, every moment. His life had become secondary to Ethan's. Every time he'd looked at Ethan and felt something that had nothing to do with work. "I've been prepared since the coffee shop," Kai said. Ethan stood up. He walked around his desk, slowly, like he was giving Kai time to run. But Kai didn't run. Kai never ran. When Ethan kissed him, it tasted like black coffee and ambition and everything Kai had been afraid of becoming. "This changes things," Ethan said against Kai's mouth. "I know," Kai whispered. "No, you don't." Ethan pulled back just enough to look at him. "But you will." First thing Ethan did the morning after was act like nothing had changed. Kai came in at 7:00 a.m. with Ethan's coffee. 1 sugar, splash of cream, and found him already at his desk, reviewing emails. Ethan looked up, gave Kai a nod of acknowledgement, and went back to his work. It was a gut punch. After months of building toward that kiss, after the intensity of it, Kai had expected something. Some acknowledgement, some shift in the dynamic. Instead, Ethan treated him like he had every other morning. The Henderson account requested a conference call, Kai said, keeping his voice professional even though his hands were shaking. "They want to discuss the restructuring proposal. I've put them on your calendar for 9 a.m. Is that acceptable?" "Fine," Ethan said, still not looking at him. The day went on like that. Ethan barely acknowledged Kai's existence, except to give him work. By noon, Kai was furious. By 3 p.m., he was wondering if the whole thing had been a mistake. By 6 p.m., he was considering quitting. "We need to talk about what happened," Kai said finally, standing in front of Ethan's desk with his arms crossed. "Because if we're going to continue working together, we can't just pretend. We're not pretending anything." Ethan interrupted. "We're establishing boundaries, which is exactly why nothing has changed." "That's not fair," Kai said. "You can't just." "I can," Ethan said flatly. "And I will. Because if I don't, this becomes complicated. And complicated means losing you. And I'm not interested in losing you." "Then what are you interested in?" Kai demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're interested in pretending I don't exist except when I'm useful to you." Ethan stood up slowly. "You think this is about pretending you don't exist? You think the reason I'm maintaining professional boundaries is because I don't care?" He moved around his desk and Kai had to force himself not to back away. "The reason I kissed you last night is because I can't stop thinking about you. The reason I'm not kissing you right now is because if I do, I'm going to lose every ounce of control I've spent 20 years building. And I need that control, Kai. I need it to function on." "Then how are we supposed to?" Kai started. "Carefully," Ethan said. "We're going to proceed very carefully. You're going to stay in your position. We're going to maintain professional boundaries during work hours. And outside of work." He paused. For the first time since the previous night, something raw crossed his face. "Outside of work, we're going to figure out if this is something real or something we both created because of proximity and circumstance. Kai wanted to argue. He wanted to demand more. But he understood what Ethan was saying. He understood that Ethan's need for control wasn't cruelty. It was a survival. Ethan had built an empire by compartmentalizing every aspect of his life. The idea of letting that crumble for feelings, for a person, terrified him. So Kai made a choice. He accepted the boundaries. The following weeks were torture in the best possible way. Days were professional. Ethan treated Kai like any other employee, which made it easier for the people around them to not suspect anything. Meetings were handled with distance. Conversations were about work. Nothing about their dynamic changed on the surface, but there were moments. A hand on Kai's shoulder as Ethan walked past his desk, eyes meeting across a conference table, and holding for just slightly too long. Late nights when they were the only ones in the office and Ethan would lean against Kai's desk, and they'd talk about things that had nothing to do with work. My father didn't want me to do this, Ethan said one night at 11 p.m., sitting on the edge of Kai's desk. He wanted me to take over his firm. It was a respectable firm, profitable, but it was small, limited. I wanted more. Did he support you when you left? Kai asked. He didn't speak to me for 5 years, Ethan said. When he finally did, I'd already built Cross Enterprises into something he could only dream of. He wanted to reconcile, and I let him. But I never forgot that he was willing to disown me for wanting something bigger. Kai understood then. He understood why Ethan needed control, why he needed to be the one making decisions, why the idea of vulnerability scared him. I'm not your father, Kai said, quietly. I know, Ethan said. That's why I'm terrified. The moment it all broke open was during a board meeting. The Henderson account, the one Kai had scheduled months ago, was presenting their restructuring proposal. Ethan was in his element, sharp and commanding, and absolutely magnetic as he walked them through the strategy. But something went wrong with the numbers. A discrepancy that Kai had somehow missed in his preparation. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to shake Ethan's confidence, to make the board members exchange worried glances. Kai watched Ethan's entire body tense. Watched him recover with practiced ease, turning the discrepancy into a minor concern that would be resolved by Friday. But Kai also watched him. After the meeting, when everyone else had left, Ethan stood at his window, looking out at the city, and he looked defeated, smaller than Kai had ever seen him. It was my mistake, Kai said from the doorway. I should have caught it, I should have. It's okay, Ethan said. It was the last thing Kai expected him to say. It's not okay. I failed you. I failed, Kai. Ethan turned around. Come here. Kai went. He always went. This is why I need boundaries, Ethan said. This is why I can't let this become what we both want it to be. Because when you're my employee, when you depend on me for your livelihood, when I have power over you, it becomes toxic. Today you made a mistake. Tomorrow I'm going to be angry about it. And you're going to feel like you have to accept that anger because I pay your salary. And I'm going to resent you for making me resent you. So I'm going to poison everything. So what are you saying? Kai asked. That we can't do this? I'm saying that if we do this, you have to leave, Ethan said. You can't work for me. The power dynamic is too unbalanced. I have too much control over your life. Kai felt like the world was falling apart. If I leave, I don't know how to pay rent. I don't have savings. I don't. I know that, Ethan said. Which is exactly why you have to leave. Because I know it, and that knowledge gives me power. And I can't have that power if I'm going to let myself love you. The word hung in the air. Love. Not want. Not desire. Love. You don't get to decide what I'm willing to risk, Kai said finally. You don't get to decide that the power dynamic is too unbalanced when I'm the one choosing to stay. You don't get to protect me by pushing me away. If I let you stay, I become the kind of person I hate, Ethan said. If I leave, I become the kind of person I hate, Kai said. So maybe the question isn't whether the contract is balanced. Maybe the question is whether we're both willing to become different people for each other. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're going to need a new job." "I'm not resigning," Kai said. "You are," Ethan said. "Not now. In 6 months, I'm going to spend the next 6 months training someone to replace you. During that time, you're going to find a new position. And when you leave, we're going to start over. Clean. Without the employment contract. And if I don't want to wait 6 months, then you don't get me at all," Ethan said, "because I'm not going to be the kind of man who keeps someone financially dependent on him while claiming to love them. That's not love. That's control. And I've had enough control in my life. 6 months might not seem like a long time in the grand scheme of existence. But when you're counting down the days until you can be with someone, 6 months feels like a lifetime." Kai threw himself into job searching with the intensity that Ethan had taught him. He attended networking events. He sent out resumes. He interviewed with 3 different companies, each one offering him positions that were significant steps up from his role as Ethan's assistant. But it was also torture, because every advancement he made, Ethan was somehow involved, helping him practice interview answers. Ethan coaching him on negotiation tactics. Ethan pretending it was just mentorship, while they both knew it was something far more complicated. "You're going to take the position at Morrison & Associates," Ethan said one day. "It wasn't a question." "How do you know what offers I've received?" Kai asked. "Because I know you," Ethan said simply. "Morrison offers exactly what you need. Mid-level position, good salary, room for growth, and more importantly, it's removed enough from cross-enterprises that there won't be any appearance of impropriety. So you've already decided my future for me?" "No," Ethan said. "I've simply identified the option that makes sense. What you do with that information is up to you." It was classic Ethan, maintaining control while pretending he wasn't. And the maddening part was that he was right. Morrison & Associates was the best option. The salary was solid enough that Kai could actually build savings. The position was interesting. It was objectively the right choice. So, Kai accepted the offer, and, in doing so, he locked himself into a timeline. 3 months at Morrison to establish himself in the position. 3 months of separation from Ethan, except for the required professional distance. 3 months of watching Ethan at company events and conferences. Of having to be cordial and professional and nothing more. The hardest part was watching Ethan develop feelings for other people, or rather, watching Ethan be perceived as having feelings for other people. A board member's daughter who came to a company party. Consultant Ethan worked with on a merger. No actual intimacy.
Kai knew Ethan well enough to know he wasn't actually interested in anyone else.
But the performance of it, the maintaining of appearances, the fact that Ethan was out there, living his life, while Kai was stuck in this liminal space. "Are you doing this on purpose?" Kai demanded one night, 3 months into his new position. "Doing what?" Ethan asked, though he knew exactly what Kai meant. "Making it obvious that you're dating other people. Making sure I see you with other people. Making sure I know that you're moving on." "I'm not moving on," Ethan said calmly. "I'm existing, which is what you should be doing. You're supposed to be building a life at Morrison. You're supposed to be showing me that you can function outside of my orbit."
"I can function,"
Kai said. "Perfectly fine. I'm doing an excellent job. My supervisor thinks I'm great. My coworkers like me. I'm becoming the person I needed to become." "Good," Ethan said. Then, Why are you here in my office at midnight on a Thursday, angry at me for having dinner with someone? Because I'm miserable, Kai wanted to say. Because every day without you is a day I'm holding my breath. Because I don't know how to exist in a world where you're not the center of it. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he said, when does the contract end? 3 months, Ethan said. When you complete your probation at Morrison. I'm already ahead of schedule, Kai said. I could do it in 6 weeks. No, Ethan said. We're doing this right. We're doing this in 3 months. That's the contract. I don't want a contract, Kai said. I don't want timelines and boundaries and careful planning. I want you to just let me in. That's not how I work, Ethan said. I know, Kai said. That's the problem. He left Ethan's office and didn't come back, not socially, not after hours. Not for anything that wasn't strictly professional. He threw himself into Morrison and Associates with every fiber of his being. He volunteered for extra projects. He stayed late. He became the kind of employee that companies fight over. And he built a life that didn't include Ethan. It was a new kind of torture. One where Kai was actually succeeding at the thing Ethan wanted him to do. He was becoming independent. He was establishing himself in his field. He was proving that he could exist without Ethan. But, in doing so, he was also proving that maybe he didn't need Ethan at all. The 6 months ended on a Tuesday. Kai knew, because he'd marked it in his calendar. He'd done everything, as Ethan asked. He'd established himself. He'd completed his probation. He'd become the person Ethan insisted he needed to be. But when the day arrived, Ethan didn't reach out. Kai waited all day. He checked his phone obsessively. He convinced himself that Ethan was waiting, that there was some grand gesture coming, that Ethan was going to show up at his apartment with flowers and finally admit that the control and the contracts and the boundaries had all been necessary. But they were done now. By 9 p.m., Kai couldn't take it anymore. He went to Cross Enterprises knowing Ethan would be there. Ethan was always there. And he found him at his desk, looking exactly like he had the first Kai had been interviewed for this job. The contract ended, Kai said. I know, Ethan said. He didn't look up from his work. So what now? Kai demanded. Now, Ethan said, finally looking at him. I ask you the same question I asked you 6 months ago. Are you prepared for what it means to work for someone powerful? Kai felt his entire world collapse. You want me to come back as your assistant? No. Ethan said, I want you to accept a partnership. I'm restructuring the company. I need someone in a senior position. Not reporting to me. Not beneath me. Beside me. And I want that person to be you, but only if you want it. Only if after 6 months of building your own life, you still want to come back to me. Kai realized then what Ethan had been doing. The boundaries, the contract, the 6 months. It hadn't been about control. It had been about making sure that when Kai came back, it was a choice, not a necessity. I don't want a partnership, Kai said. Ethan's expression changed, hurt flashing across his features for just a moment. I want love, Kai said. I want someone who chooses me the way I've chosen you. I want someone who trusts me enough to be vulnerable. I want someone who lets me in completely without a contract. Ethan stood up slowly. I can give you that, he said. I've been ready to give you that for 6 months. But I needed to know that you wouldn't lose yourself in the process. I haven't, Kai said. But I also haven't stopped wanting you. Good, Ethan said. He walked around his desk and pulled Kai close. Because I'm done with contracts. I'm done with boundaries. I'm done with anything that keeps you at arm's length. When he kissed Kai this time, it tasted like freedom. The first 3 months of their relationship, once they'd finally actually begun one, were perfect. Kai moved into Ethan's penthouse. They cooked breakfast together on Sunday mornings. They talked about their days, over expensive wine, and takeout from restaurants that required reservations. They were the kind of couple that made other people slightly uncomfortable with how openly they existed together. But perfect, Kai was learning, had a shelf life. It started small, a comment about Kai's outfit being unprofessional during a company event, a suggestion that Kai should probably spend less time with his coworkers and more time at home. Seemingly innocent question about Kai's day that turned into an interrogation about who he'd talked to and for how long. The control crept back in, so gradually that Kai almost didn't notice it, but he did notice. He noticed because he had been paying attention for the last 6 months. "You don't like Marcus?" Kai said one evening, noticing how Ethan's jaw clenched when Kai's coworker had called earlier. "I don't dislike him," Ethan said. "I just don't see why you need to have lunch with him multiple times a week." "Because he's my friend," Kai said, "and he's going through a rough breakup, and he needs support." "You have me for support," Ethan said. "You don't need him." It was said casually, over dinner, like it was obvious, like it wasn't absolutely terrifying. "Ethan, that's not." "I know what you're going to say," Ethan interrupted. "You're going to say that I'm being controlling. But I'm not. I'm being practical. You're in a high-level position now. People are going to interpret your friendships as professional alliances. And when you're close to someone like Marcus, someone who could potentially be a threat to my company." "Marcus is not a threat to your company," Kai said. "He could be," Ethan said. "Everyone could be. But I'm willing to accept that risk with you, because I trust you. I just don't trust him." It was such a reasonable thing to say. It was such an Ethan thing to say. And it was absolutely a manipulation. Though Kai knew Ethan probably didn't see it that way. "I'm not going to stop seeing Marcus," Kai said. "I'm not asking you to," Ethan said. "I'm just asking you to be careful, to remember that every action you take reflects on both of us now." The thing about being in a relationship with someone brilliant is that they're very good at making you doubt your own perceptions. Ethan never explicitly forbade Kai from seeing Marcus. He never said, "If you see him, I'm leaving." Instead, he created an environment where seeing Marcus felt like a betrayal, like a failure to prioritize the relationship, so Kai saw Marcus less and less. And eventually, Kai was too busy with work and Ethan to maintain the friendship at all. Then it was his family. "Your mother called again," Ethan said. "3 times this week." I know," Kai said. "I've been meaning to call her back." "You also didn't mention that you'd invited her to visit next month," Ethan said. "When were you going to tell me that?" "I'm telling you now," Kai said. "She's going to stay for a week and then she'll leave. It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal," Ethan said, "because a week means she'll be here during an important quarter for the company. It means you'll be distracted. It means your head won't be at work where it needs to be." "I can manage both," Kai said. "Can you?" Ethan asked. "Because the last time your family was involved, you were emotionally unavailable for 2 weeks. I'm just not sure you have the capacity to manage both. And I need you to have capacity for the company." "For me." Kai's mother didn't visit. She called to say that Ethan had called her, expressing his concerns about the timing. And honestly, it would be better if they waited until after the quarter. Ethan never explicitly told Kai to cut his family off either. Ethan just made it increasingly difficult to prioritize them. It took 2 months of this before Kai realized what was happening. He was regressing. All the independence he'd built at Morrison and Associates was crumbling. He was isolating. He was becoming dependent on Ethan again. But this time, it wasn't because of an employment contract. It was because Ethan had made it clear that anyone outside their relationship was a threat. The night Kai finally snapped was a company event, a gala for a new merger Ethan was spearheading. Kai looked stunning, dressed in a suit that Ethan had picked out, standing beside Ethan, playing the role of dutiful partner while Ethan worked the room. And then Ethan introduced Kai to someone. "This is James," Ethan said, his hand on the small of Kai's back. "He's a consultant who's going to be working with us on the next phase of expansion. James, this is my partner, Kai, though Kai's going to be too busy with the new project to maintain his social life for the foreseeable future, so I'm sure you won't see much of him." It was said lightly, charmingly, in a way that made James laugh, in a way that made the comment sound like a joke, but Kai felt it like a punch. That night, after the gala, Kai finally had the conversation he should have had weeks ago. "You're doing it again," Kai said. "You're doing exactly what you promised you wouldn't do. You're using control instead of trust." "I'm protecting you," Ethan said. "I'm protecting us. You're too naive to understand how people work, how they can use your kindness against you." "That's not your decision to make," Kai said. "I get to choose how I interact with the world. I get to choose my relationships. I get to be hurt and make mistakes, and learn from them. But instead, you've decided that the only relationship I'm allowed to have is with you." "That's not true," Ethan said. "You can have friends. You just have to be smart about it." "No," Kai said. "I can't, because you make it impossible. You make every relationship outside of you feel like a betrayal. You make me feel guilty for wanting anything that isn't you." "Is that so terrible?" Ethan asked. "Wanting to be someone's priority?" "Yes," Kai said, "when that priority comes at the cost of everything else. When I'm not allowed to have a life, a family, friends, when I'm only allowed to have you." "You have a life," Ethan said. "You have work, you have me. What else do you need?" And Kai realized in that moment that Ethan genuinely couldn't see it. Ethan genuinely believed he was being reasonable, that his love was enough, that Kai should be grateful to be completely consumed by it. "I need to leave," Kai said. He said it quietly, but Ethan heard it. "You're not leaving," Ethan said. "You're overreacting to a difficult evening. Tomorrow, when you've had time to process, you'll realize that I was right." "No," Kai said. "I won't, because I'm leaving now." Kai packed a bag that night. He didn't take anything that Ethan had bought. He took his clothes, his documents, his phone. He left the penthouse at 3 a.m. and went to a hotel. It took one night in that hotel room for Kai to understand the full scope of what had happened. Ethan had systematically isolated him. Ethan had convinced him that every person outside their relationship was a threat. Ethan had made him dependent, just like the employment contract had, only this time the chains were emotional rather than financial. And the worst part was that Ethan had probably believed he was doing it out of love. Kai didn't hear from Ethan for 3 days. He'd turned off his phone, knowing that Ethan would call, knowing that he wasn't strong enough to hear Ethan's voice and not capitulate. On the 4th day, he turned his phone back on to find 67 missed calls and 93 text messages. Most of them were from Ethan. Some were variations on the same theme. "Come home. We can fix this." Others were angry. "You're being irrational. You're throwing away everything we built." A few were vulnerable. "I don't know how to function without you. Please come back." But there were also messages from people Kai hadn't heard from in months. Marcus, asking if Kai was okay and offering to let Kai stay with him. Kai's mother, who somehow knew that something was wrong. Former colleagues from Morrison and Associates who'd noticed Kai's absence from the company. It was like Ethan's influence was lifting and the world was coming back into focus. Kai checked into a different hotel. He called his mother. He went to lunch with Marcus. He did all the things that Ethan had made feel like betrayals. And Slowly, he remembered why those things had been important. But he also did something that terrified him more than leaving. He asked himself the hard question. How much of this was Ethan, and how much of this was him? Truth was complicated. Ethan had isolated Kai, yes, but Kai had also chosen to prioritize Ethan's needs over his own. Kai had chosen, repeatedly, to accept Ethan's explanations for things that made him uncomfortable. Kai had been complicit in his own isolation. On the 5th day, Ethan showed up at the hotel. Kai almost didn't let him in, but then he did, because avoidance wasn't going to solve anything, because he needed to understand what had happened, and that meant facing Ethan. I've been in therapy for the last 5 days, Ethan said. He looked terrible. Like he hadn't slept. Like he'd finally understood something he'd been avoiding for years. I called a therapist the morning after you left, and I've spent 5 days talking about why I think I have the right to control the people I care about. Kai didn't say anything. He let Ethan continue. My father did this, Ethan said. He controlled everything. He controlled where I went to school, what I studied, what career path I would take, and when I rebelled, when I decided to build cross enterprises against his wishes. I promised myself that I would never be like him, but I became exactly like him. I just did it with love instead of authority. Ethan, Kai started. I'm not going to ask you to come back, Ethan said. I'm not going to promise that I'm fixed, because I'm not. But I'm going to work on it. I'm going to do the work. And I'm going to accept that you might not want to be part of that journey. Kai had prepared for a lot of things. He'd prepared for Ethan to be angry. He'd prepared for manipulation. He'd prepared for grand gestures and promises. What he hadn't prepared for was Ethan actually taking responsibility. I need to know something, Kai said. Were you always like this, or did you become this way because of me? Both, Ethan said. My baseline is controlling, but I made a conscious choice to escalate with you because I was afraid. I was afraid that if I gave you any space, you'd realize you didn't need me. And I think I realized on some level that forcing you to need me was the only way to keep you. It was honest in a way that Kai needed. It was an acknowledgement of the harm, without making excuses for it. I loved you, Kai said. Before all of this, when we were at Morrison and you were being patient and letting me figure things out. I loved you then. I know, Ethan said. That's the part I can't forgive myself for. You gave me love, and I responded by trying to control it. They stood in the hotel room, separated by too much distance and too much history. Kai made a decision. Not to go back, not to pretend that it was okay, but to stop running. I'm going to give you one chance, Kai said. Not to fix things, but to actually do the work. Real therapy. Real change. And if you're serious about that, then maybe in 6 months or a year or whatever timeline actually makes sense, we can figure out what this is. I'll take it, Ethan said immediately. But not now, Kai continued. Right now I need space. I need to rebuild the relationships you made me destroy. I need to remember who I am without you. And you need to do your work without using me as motivation. I understand, Ethan said. And if you contact me before I'm ready, if you try to manipulate me into coming back, if you do anything that feels like control, I'm done. We're done, not temporarily. Permanently. I understand, Ethan said again. And this time, Kai believed him. After Ethan left, Kai sat on the hotel bed and cried. Not because he was sad, but because he was relieved. Because he'd finally set a boundary with someone he loved. Because he'd finally chosen himself. That night, Kai called Marcus and said yes to the offer of a place to stay. He called his mother and made plans for the weekend. He emailed Morrison and Associates and asked about returning to his position. And he waited, not for Ethan to change, but for herself to heal. 6 months later, Kai was officially back at Morrison and Associates, working as a senior strategic consultant. He had his own office. He had colleagues he actually liked. He had a life that existed outside of any relationship. It was still fragile in some ways. Kai was learning to trust his own judgment again. But it was real. It was his. Ethan had honored every boundary Kai set. No contact for 6 months. No manipulation. Nothing. Which was both beautiful and terrifying because it meant that if they did reconnect, it would be a genuine choice from both sides, not a reaction to being pulled back in. The day Ethan reached out was a Tuesday. Just a text. I finished my course of therapy. I'd like to talk, if you're ready. Kai read that text 17 times. He thought about ignoring it. He thought about responding with a simple no. But the truth was that he wanted to know if Ethan had changed. More importantly, he wanted to know if he had changed. If he was strong enough to be with Ethan without losing himself. They met at the same coffee shop where they'd first interviewed. Full circle, Ethan had probably calculated that. It was the kind of thing he did. Ethan looked different. Softer, maybe. Like someone who'd been doing the work of understanding himself. He was still beautiful in that sharp, commanding way, but there was something less dangerous about him now. You look good, Ethan said. I feel good, Kai replied. Better than I have in years. I'm glad, Ethan said, and Kai believed him. They talked for hours. Not about reconciliation or the future or what might happen between them. They talked about what had happened. Ethan talked about his therapy, about understanding the root of his need for control. Kai talked about rebuilding his relationships, about finding himself again. I'm not going to tell you that I'm fixed, Ethan said eventually. Because I'm not. I'm going to struggle with control my entire life, but I'm aware of it now. And I'm working on choosing differently. That's all I need, Kai said. Not perfection, just awareness and effort. Would you be willing to try again? Ethan asked. Not living together, not enmeshed in every aspect of each other's lives, but together, healthy together. Kai thought about it. He thought about the months of growth he'd done. He thought about whether she still loved Ethan underneath everything that had happened. And the answer was yes. He did. But it was a different kind of love than it had been before. It was love with boundaries, love with mutual respect, love that didn't consume everything. I would, Kai said. On one condition. Ethan continued. We see a couples therapist, together, every week, as long as we're together. Kai felt something shift in his chest. This was not the Ethan who needed to be in control. This was the Ethan who was willing to be vulnerable enough to sit in a room with a professional and talk about his flaws. Okay, Kai said. I can do that. They started dating like normal people, which was absolutely bizarre given their history. Coffee dates, dinners, late-night conversations on the phone. Ethan was patient, in a way Kai didn't know he could be. Patient in a way that didn't feel like calculation or strategy, but like genuine restraint. 3 months into their renewed relationship, Kai moved back into Ethan's penthouse. But this time, Kai kept his own space, his own office, his own circle of friends who were welcome in their home. Boundaries that weren't negotiable, and Ethan respected every single one. The night Ethan proposed, they were at home cooking dinner together. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a quiet moment between two people who'd learned how to actually be together. I want to spend my life with you, Ethan said, sliding a ring on Kai's finger, but I want to spend it as your partner, not your keeper. I want to love you, but I want to let you go every single day and come back because you want to. That's the only way this works, Kai cried. Not because Ethan had proposed, but because Ethan had finally understood that love wasn't about possession. It was about choice. Every single day, choosing each other. They got married on a Saturday, in a small ceremony, with close friends and family. Marcus was there. Kai's mother was there. Ethan's therapist was probably somewhere in the audience. It was perfect and simple, and everything a wedding should be. But the real moment, the one Kai would remember forever, was the one right after they said their vows. When Ethan looked at Kai and said, "I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that I can love you without controlling you." And Kai believed him. Because that's what they'd learned through all of it. That love wasn't about contracts or control or possession. Love was about vulnerability and trust. And the choice to stay, even when staying was hard. They'd built something from destruction. They'd found redemption in therapy and honesty and the willingness to actually change. They'd become the people they needed to become in order to love each other properly. And that was the real contract, the one that mattered, the one that would last.